Welcome to the OMG Tarot podcast. I'm your host, Lindsay, aka OMG Tarot. Today, we're talking about number 12 in the major arcana, the Hanged Man. Why the Hanged Man this time? Because the last few cards, the Chariot, the Magician, Death, those all had a lot to do with movement and progress. And also, this is kind of embarrassing, but I should share it with you. If you were one of the people who listened to the Death card episode between July 23rd and July 24th, you heard the old version. So go back and listen to the new one if you want. Here's the problem. In the section where I discussed dropping the Death card into the major arcana, and I compared it to its preceding card and its following card, I made a huge mistake that, as someone who's been reading cards for as long as I have, I'm still in shock on how I made that error. I said Justice was number 12 and recorded a whole section justifying how Justice preps you up for Death, which all the cards do stack on each other and create a linear narrative, but Justice doesn't immediately precede Death. Justice is number 11. The Hanged Man is number 12, so the Hanged Man is the one who immediately precedes Death. In this episode, there will be no more snubbing of the Hanged Man. This episode is all about the Hanged Man. Or, if you prefer, the Hanged One. So I thought it was time to take a chill pill and just hang back. It's also summertime in the part of the world where I live, so it's hot. And on hot days like this, you just want to hang out and chill. Traditionally, this card is known as the Hanged Man, and that's what it's called in the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. However, in some more modern decks, it's changed to the Hanged One. I have a few decks that name this card that, and I like that. I like the gender-neutral naming of this card because anybody could hang upside down by their ankle and get a different perspective of the current situation. And then if we go back into tarot history, certain older decks, like the Solabusca Tarot, have very different depictions of this card. In fact, they're not even called the Hanged Man. I spoke about this a bit in the Temperance episode where we discussed the 4 cardinal virtues and how they're depicted in tarot, and how the virtue of prudence eventually evolved into what we're reading now as the Hanged Man. Now, if you take a look on tarot forums on the internet, there's some debate as to whether prudence evolved into the Hanged Man or if it evolved into the World or the High Priestess. And the answer is, like a lot of answers with regard to tarot history, is it's muddled, and we might not have a totally clear-cut answer. But there are a lot in the tarot community who say that prudence evolved into the modern Hanged Man card, and that we can find evidence for that in how the card was numbered in the Solabusca deck, as well as what number 12 in that deck, and to my knowledge, other contemporary decks, what those cards meant, and then how those themes have carried over into our modern Hanged Man card. As a virtue, prudence essentially is good decision-making. It's making logical, rational decisions from your current perspective. Think about how perspective fits into the imagery on this card. Literally, we have a guy hanging upside down by his ankle. Imagine his perspective. Everything he's seeing is upside down. It's possible he's not seeing everything the way he's quote-unquote supposed to be seeing it. It's also possible that he's seeing the underside of things and the inner workings. He's seeing how the sausage is made, so to speak. He also, unlike Justice, who's been presented with a wide variety of nuanced information and is being asked to make a judgment, this guy only sees what his eyes see, and he acknowledges that he's not in a position to see things as they're typically presented. It's an enlightening experience. Take a look at that halo around his head. By hanging upside down and being forced to look at things from a new perspective and only having his eyes to trust, he's understanding what he's looking at in a unique, perhaps unconventional way that he never would have seen if he hadn't been strung up by his ankle. Because take a look at his expression. Despite being strung up by his ankle, he doesn't necessarily look uncomfortable. He also doesn't necessarily look like he's having a bad time here. He just looks like he's having a time. He's just taking it all in. He's not struggling to get down. He's just accepted that this is where he is for now, so he might as well just look at things from this vantage point. Keep that idea in mind when you read this card, because in tarot, the Hanged Man typically symbolizes themes of letting go and surrender and accepting where you are right now. And in a deck where so many other cards seem focused on growth, think about how death is clearing what's not serving you so that way you can grow, and think about how the chariot is, all right, let's drive forward, let's go, let's move. I can come up with lots of other examples. The magician, he's creating magic and creating progress through his tools, and temperance is balancing those elements and creating a new path. You've probably noticed by now there's that theme of progress and movement. So, this idea of wait, stop, hold on, be still can kind of seem like, how does that fit into the narrative here? And is that a good thing? At this point, I want to emphasize there are no good cards and bad cards. Yes, there are cards that in certain situations you'd probably rather not see, and there are certain cards that are generally pleasurable and positive experiences, but I don't like putting cards into a box of good card versus bad card because it's so highly contextual. That said, in the context of the major arcana, I'd probably read the Hanged Man as appreciating the progress you've made and appreciating everything about the vantage point you're currently at. Because notice the beam from which he's hanging and the tree trunk that's behind him. Those look an awful lot like the wands from the minor arcana, don't they? And we know the wands are the suit associated with action and progress and that fiery energy. It's an interesting juxtaposition, isn't it? I think that's a really good keyword to keep in mind with this card, juxtaposition. Because while he's hanging still and observing, he's doing it against this background of continual progress and continual growth. Note the leaves all the way up there on our horizontal beam. Things are growing and moving and developing, and he's watching it all from a very still, stable place. So would I call it a bad card? No, not at all. I would call it a necessary card, and I might call it a necessary stop along the way. To use an analogy, if you imagine the Fool's Journey as a long road trip across the United States, the hangman might be when you pull off the highway and you hang out in the rest area and just sit and you look at the skyline of whatever city you're passing through in the distance and you just reflect on, oh boy, we've been in this car for 10 hours already. We've come pretty far. Oh my, we still have another 8 hours to go. Okay then. Now I know how far I can go without a bathroom break. And now I have a more realistic idea of how many hours I can actually drive without stopping for a break, because back on the East Coast, the thought of driving 10 hours through sounded doable. But now that we're in the middle, oi, now that we've actually had to do it, yeah, no, not happening. Like the Magician, the Hanged Man is another card that isn't associated with a specific zodiac sign. It's instead associated with a planet, and in this case, that planet is Neptune. Neptune is all the way out there, far from the sun, where it's rather dark. And in astrology, it's associated with our relationship with the abstract and the spiritual and the mystical. It's associated with creativity and going beyond what's in the material world and into what's beyond. What do we believe? It's dreams, it's imagination, and it's the modern ruler of the sign Pisces, who is the deep-diving fish. They're the ones who really go deep in their feelings, and they're the intuitive, the dreamy, the mystical ones of the zodiac. So as you interpret the Hanged Man, keep these Neptunian themes in mind. Think about being the observer and connecting the dots as you take different pieces of information and find the connection between them and finding meaning rather than understanding through doing. So although the hangman's external actions are pretty static, his internal actions aren't. He's actively observing and understanding and building out that perspective. Another key symbol in this card that I'd like to draw your attention to is the hangman's pose. That's not exactly the most natural-looking pose, is it? He's strung up by one ankle and he's got the other leg bent at the knee. It's folded behind his straight leg. Then if we look down to his arms, they're folded at the elbows with his hands behind his back. I've seen and heard a few different ways of interpreting this pose, and none of them has really stuck in my craw as yes, that's absolutely the one that I'm going to work with in my practice. I've heard that this pose with the hangman's legs looks kind of like the number four, and in tarot, the number four tends to represent solid boundaries and being inside the box and being a bit restrictive. I can see the logic there. However, I'm not totally convinced, and here's why. To see the four, you have to flip the card upside down. It doesn't really look like a four. It, in my opinion at least, only looks like a four when you're told that, yes, this is what's on the card. You know what I'm saying? When it's after you're primed to see something, then you can pick it out of an image. But if you aren't told beforehand that that's what you're looking for, it might not register. The other interpretation that I can see the logic behind, and if anything, I might be more inclined to interpret it this way, is think about what happens to gravity when you move your legs like that. That this bent leg is kind of forcing that gravity down a bit. And he's surrendering to the force of gravity. It's pulling him down and it's heavy. So he's bending his legs to make it a little bit more bearable and to just accept the position he's currently in. Compare this with the figure on the world card, where she's standing up straight and she's got a leg bent behind her. While she's moving upward and moving forward and really ascending into the next cycle, she needs the opposite. She needs that energy to pull that leg upward versus allowing it to be pulled downward. I guess for me, the idea of making yourself more comfortable while you're in this observer position just makes more sense logically, and that's why I tend to lean a little bit more on that. But really, when I read The Hanged Man, my primary focus is on his face and the halo of enlightenment around his head as he's observing everything that he's looking at. When I look at The Hanged Man, something else jumps out to me, and it's similar to what jumps out at me when I'm looking at strength. It's that this card is kinda stark. Look at it next to a card like Death or the Magician or Temperance. Notice how comparatively fewer things are going on in this card. We've got literally a gray background, the T-shaped mast, and our figure. I'm reading this lack of set dressing, if you'd like to call it, and this stark gray background as the need to stay focused on exactly what you're looking at and not get distracted by a bunch of background details. This card is pretty straightforward, kind of like Strength. And compare that to any one of the cards that I just threw out as being more detailed cards. With those, there's more of a story that's fleshed out. There are more details to discuss. Versus the Hanged Man, the entire story is how intensely you need to be focusing on what it is you're observing and the understanding that you're gaining through that intense focus. So, why is this the point where we're being asked to hang back, hold still, and simply observe? Let's drop the Hanged Man into the major arcana and see where he fits into the story. At number 12, the Hanged Man comes after Justice, number 11. As I discussed in the Justice episode, the very first episode of this podcast, justice is all about making a fair, just decision based on the information you've been presented with. It's part logic and part intuition, and where they come together to map out what actually makes sense in terms of making a choice that's going to be fair and balanced and appropriate. So, after you've done that work and you've reached your conclusion, now it's time to sit with it. That's where we get the Hanged Man. Think of the phrase, you've made your bed, now you've got to lie in it. That's what the Hanged Man is doing. He's got to stop, pause, watch, and see how the consequences of his actions will unfold. Because now, through careful observation and the level of detachment that being strung up affords him, he's able to see the whole story. He's able to see the beginning, the middle, the end, and all of the details that he might have missed. That can also include the details that point to what needs to go and what's not healthy anymore, which leads us into the following card, number 13, Death. The Hanged Man could be the point where you develop enough perspective to zero in on what you need to shed as you undergo transformation and start anew, which is what you're doing in the Death card. So when the Hanged Man comes up in a reading, what does it mean? It means it's time to stop. It's time to pause, and it's time to look critically at everything that's in front of you. It might be time to pull back and put yourself in that observer role because if you've been go, 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 sometimes we need to breathe and sometimes we need to reflect and take a good hard look at what we've been doing and all the things that we've been involving ourselves with and really determine if they're still in our best interest. After all, if justice is the midway point of the major arcana, the Hanged Man at number 12 is officially the back end of the major arcana. It's the very beginning of the second half, but we are now in the second half, and it's time to reflect back on where we've been so far. So far, we've began as the fool, about to jump off a cliff with our little white dog along for moral support, and we've learned a couple of lessons along the way. We've met the Empress, the Emperor, the High Priestess, the Hierophant. We've fallen in love, we've gotten in our car and driven off, we've wheeled and dealed with the Wheel of Fortune, and we've reflected on everything that's been thrown our way, and ideally, hopefully, made the right decision in justice. So let's do a sample poll that incorporates the Hanged Man. Let's take it back to our sample poll from a few episodes ago, the Chariot, and check in on our main character who fell in love at the Jersey Shore. So, let's say, all right, tarot cards, I've met somebody new down the shore. We seem like we've really hit it off, but where is this relationship going? So we shuffle, 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 and we've pulled out the Empress to pair with our Hanged Man. Now, firstly, since the Hanged Man is showing up in a relationship spread, I would say, well, I don't think that this relationship is going to be moving at a rapid pace. In fact, I think you really need to take it slowly and spend some time observing them and watching them and really getting to know who they are as a person. Things like they say you can go out to eat with someone, and the way they treat the waitstaff is really a good indicator of their character. Or observe how they interact with their family. And the fact that we pulled the Empress says to me specifically, observe how they interact with their mother and other maternal figures in their life. Maybe they have a really great relationship with their mom, and through your Hanged Man observation, you're going to see a new side of them and fall in love with them even more when you see just how strong that bond is. Or it could go in the other direction. Their mother could be very hovering and very overbearing, and perhaps you need to brace yourself for if I get myself into a long-term relationship with this person, it's really going to be kind of like a three-way relationship because their mom is always going to be there. Or it could simply be other clues are here to be found in their relationship with their mother and other maternal figures, like I said. So maybe their grandmother, maybe important aunts or other female figures in their life, because the Empress is the mother archetype, so it speaks to moms in all forms, and not just moms of literal children, but if you find yourself in a scenario where someone's like, my business is my baby, or my art is my baby, what are you pouring all of yourself into and potentially making sacrifices for in order to see it grow up well? That's big Empress energy, that very bountiful, very fertile, very I'm putting all of myself into what I'm growing and nurturing in order to see it be the best it can be. But let's bring it back to our reading. I'd say, in short, spend some time observing your new Jersey Shore paramour's relationship with maternal figures. Maybe this individual is a mom. Maybe you need to really spend some time observing who they are with their children and determining if that's the kind of relationship that you would like to be part of. In any case, I don't think this is saying anything negative. In fact, I think it's rather positive and affirming and just, all right, step back and watch and look, but it seems like, however we slice it, maternal relationships are very important to this individual. Imagine if, instead of the Empress, we had pulled the Tower. How might you read that? Maybe sit back and watch the train wreck happen? Maybe. But I'm still very much in favor of this hypothetical 4th of July holiday weekend relationship. That just about wraps up our discussion of the Hanged Man. So, I hope you learned something, And I hope that next time you pull the Hanged Man in a tarot card reading, you feel confident to interpret him and drop him into some context with the other cards that you've pulled. Next week, I'm going to be coming at you with something a little bit different from what we've been doing, and I'm going to throw up a poll to see if you guys like that or if we want to go back to our major arcana deep dives. Now, don't worry, we're going to be doing all the major arcana cards, but as you know, there are only 22 of them, and I don't plan on ending this podcast after 22 episodes. So, let me know what you think. And as always, if you want to give me a follow on Instagram, my handle is its_OMG_tarot. And if you want to read my blog and learn more about me, head over to omgtarot.com. Alrighty, that's about it. Have a great night, everyone.